The animation opens up on a foggy morning. We can see a driver listening to Wacky Jaw on the radio. Suddenly he has been hit by a superhero named Gravity, who is thrown onto his car, which causes a minor accident. After a brief pause, his opponent pounces on him in an intense battle, and then finishes off Gravity with his super move, which is the almighty finger. This causes a major blast and clears up the whole fog. After the battle, a masked young girl named X comes to pick up Gravity comic for her collection as she welcomes him to routine. Meanwhile, at Phantom Zone, a local comic shop, Mike and his best friend Nick come over to get a band record for his mother, but when they realize that the price is too much, they begin to hassle and then end up with a $40 price and an extra comic book called The Crying Man. Mike begins to read the comic and realizes that basically he is just a superhero who cries a lot. Just as he continues reading, Mike bumps into the school crush, Lucy. Just as he gazes into her soul, he begins to imagine beautiful memories with her, but his best friend snaps him out of his daydream. Lucy wasn't buying into his imagination as she tells him to watch where he was going next time. When Mike realizes that Lucy is going to their school party, he proceeds to ask his mother for permission. We get to find out that Mike's mother is a reporter, but she does her analysis at dogs and cat fashion shows. Mike brides her with her favorite band record as she lets him go have fun. 30 minutes before the party, Mike continues reading the Crying Man comic. He feels the story is too weird as it just talks about sadness and tears. Mike calls out Crying Man and surprisingly, he appears out of the comic book. He sits and shares his emotions with Mike in the bathroom when Mike fails to recognize him as a superhero. Things got worse when he stepped on Mike's toy collection and mistakenly breaks one. Crying Man unleashes his full tears as he destroys everything in the room. During this event, Mike calls him back inside the comic book. Later on, Mike meets up with his best friend and he tries to let him know that the comic book could call out superheroes, but it is too unreal to believe Mike. He attempts to summon the Crying Man again to prove he isn't lying, but all attempts prove to be futile. Nick becomes frustrated and then decides to leave. Just as he walks away, Mike decides to try another time, and this time, the Crying Man comes out of the comic. He even saves a distracted Nick from getting hit by a truck. Nick is astonished by this. The Crying Man senses that someone needs to be saved somewhere else, so they all set off as they proceed to their next rescue mission. The next scene opens up with Black Knight, a superhero who carries himself so highly, he is sent on a mission to break into a house to steal a comic book. Just after he has succeeded in getting the book, he accidentally sets the house on fire. Crying Man arrives at the scene, however, the fire had gotten more bad, as we get to find out that a little girl is stuck in the house, and she needs to be saved. Crying Man then encourages Mike to join him in becoming a hero, as they both go into the burning house. Meanwhile, while Black Knight tries to escape from the burning fire, he hears a little girl cry and decides to turn back to save her. Black Knight tries to act courageous, but he is actually scared of the flames. He cries out for help, and luckily he's being heard by Crying Man, who helps him clear the way with his tears. Black Knight manages to bring the little girl to safety, but then ends up back in the fire with Crying Man and Mike. Things become serious as the roof begins to fall on them. They are all one move away from burning inside the fire. Crying Man explains to Mike that they are interlinked as Mike's emotions will determine his energy. So Mike begins to imagine bad stuff happening to him and Lucy. He activates the tsunami tears, and this gives Crying Man the required amount of tears to save them all from the burning fire. Crying Man becomes exhausted and is sucked back into the comics while Black Knight saves a fallen Mike. After saving Mike, Black Knight returns to his owner Dirk, a nerd who had ordered him to steal the Mummy's Girl comic book for his selfish collection. The next day, Nick pays Mike a visit, and they both sit to discuss how to test Crying Man's various abilities and use the powers to their full potential. During the practice session, they get to find out that the more emotional Crying Man becomes, the more energy he accumulates. Whenever Crying Man uses too much of his emotions, Mike becomes extremely exhausted as they are both linked to each other. When they decide to go on a break, Mike discovers that the producer of the comic is Scott, so he asks Crying Man to tell him more about his creator Scott. Crying Man lets them know that Scott is the creator of so many superhero comic books that could actually come to life. Nick is excited about this and plans to purchase every single comic, but Dirk the nerd is already sketching out his own evil plans too. We get to find out that a mysterious YouTuber known as 51 Library was giving out detailed information concerning the weird happenings in the city. Nick likes this idea and proposes to Mike that they begin filming these events as it will make them popular and fetch them a lot of money. They convey this information to Lucy and her friend, but they are less impressed as Mike can't control himself around his crush. In another city, a giant dog attacks the residents as his owner orders him to destroy everyone because she needs to exact her revenge for what they did to her. Luckily for the residents, Gravity and the masked girl come to their rescue. Gravity uses his superpowers to slow down the giant dog, but when he deactivates this mode, the dog pounces heavily on Gravity. Seeing that Gravity is losing this battle, the masked girl tries to steal the comic book from the owner, but she is attacked and the comic flies away. Meanwhile, Nick presents himself as Mike's manager when he finds out that Mike's a crying man doing less important quests like chores. He brings him a detailed analysis of how things are going to be run. He proposes a suit to Mike saying he is going to hide his identity, which will make him film all the contents he needs for his channel. During an argument, Mike doesn't feel it's right, and then orders Nick to leave his house. On his way back home, Nick receives a message from a mystery man, telling him he has seen his videos and needs to talk to him as soon as possible. Back to the battle scene, the owner is able to get hold of the comic book. She activates the dog power-up, making him bigger and stronger. Seeing this, the masked young girl activates Gravity Comical Ice, and this makes Gravity able to win the battle, defeating the owner and taking the dog back into the comic. The masked girl gets hold of the comic as she adds it to her collection. Nick arrives at the mystery man's house. It turns out to be Dirk's house as he is welcomed by his mother. Dirk reveals himself and then invites Nick inside his basement. Nick notices that something sketchy could be going on, so he rejects the offer. Dirk, on the other hand, employs the help of his comic character, Mummy's Girl. She captures Nick and then takes him to the basement. Dirk plans to get information from Nick concerning the identity of Mike, the owner of the comic book, but Nick refuses to sell out his best friend. Dirk becomes frustrated and calls out Mummy's Girl to torture him and get the information he needs. While Nick is being tortured, Mike goes to a restaurant and begins seeing different best friend memos and people showing love to one another. Mike begins to think about his best friend and reuniting with him. Just then he sees a video being posted by Dirk. He discovers that Nick has been kidnapped. Mike decides to go save his best friend. He picks up his suit and comic, then he heads over to Dirk's house. He goes into the basement where Nick is being captured and orders Dirk to release him, but instead, Dirk tells Mummy's Girl to attack him. Mike summons Crying Man as the two comic characters battle. Meanwhile, Mike goes over to save his friend as they all fight. When Dirk tries to stop him with his dangerous weapon, Mike comes up with a plan to tamper with his most valuable collection. He throws his most special toy, as Dirk abandons his lightsaber to go after the toy and prevent it from breaking. Unfortunately, his mother coming to offer him breakfast makes him panic and then drops the toy, breaking it in the process. Dirk is furious and begins to shout at his mother. He throws away her pie, hurting her feelings in the process. This makes Crying Man really angry seeing how much hurt Dirk's mom had to endure. He releases his tsunami of tears as he floods the whole house. With so much energy exhausted, the Crying Man returns to the comic, leaving Mike without a fighter, so he quickly summons Black Knight, who becomes surprised that he has changed owners. Mummy's Girl attacks him, but Black Knight is able to activate his power-up. He summons multiple birds that help in bringing down Mummy's Girl. As she faces defeat, she returns to the comic. Meanwhile, when Dirk awakes, his mother chases him out of her house. Dirk is furious when he finds out that Mike has taken his comic books, so he rushes in to find his final piece, Sparkules. He intends to use him to recover all his comic books from Mike. The scene switches to a bully named George. Just after stealing from a kid, George sees a letter telling him that at the sound of the funky groove, they will come for him. He overlooks it but then gets attacked by a masked boy and his goons. The next day, the notorious bully becomes a laughingstock as he begins dancing disco with no tune. Meanwhile, a young boy named Ed is also bullied by school bully Diego. Mike tries to fight for him, but Diego transfers the aggression to him. Luckily for Mike, he is rescued by Lucy, who stops the fight. On the other hand, a homeless Dirk wanders through the street hopelessly, but then he is cornered by some street thugs who try to beat him up. Dirk is able to summon his new comic character Sparkules, but he has no approval from his father Zeus, and he is being struck down with lightning, which creates a city-wide blackout. Meanwhile, Diego prepares to face this mysterious disco vigilante that hunts down bullies. Just then the masked boy comes with his comic disco character to attack Diego and his henchmen. When they are being beaten up seriously, Mike and Crying Man come to their aid, but the masked boy turns his attack towards them as they try to stop him from teaching Diego the bully a lesson. The Crying Man is being hit by the disco light, and then automatically he starts dancing. Mike has no other option but to draw back Crying Man inside the comic. Mike summons up the Black Knight to continue with the battle, but he failed to realize that his greatest weakness is light as he only strides in darkness. When the disco characters seem to be winning the battle, the masked boy goes over to finish off Diego, but he is stopped by Mike, who is willing to put his body in a line. Mike reveals the masked boy's identity to be Ed. He got to find out because of the star signature in each of his threat letters. In order not to make it feel exposed, Mike reveals his own identity too as he takes off his mask. Ed is shocked because Mike is Diego's regular victim. Mike tells Ed that the work of superheroes isn't to hurt other people but to protect them instead. Ed has a change of heart and then calls back his characters as he hands over its comic book to Mike, who he believes will do better than him in protecting the world. On the other hand, Dirk is saved from the thugs by a mysterious, skillful woman. In the course of the following days in the city of San Francisco, the comic books are being allocated to different residents as they possess their special characters. Some use it for their own goodwill, while others like Harry uses Hummingbird character to steal from the people. An elderly woman uses her superhero, Mr. Justice, to tend to her garden and fight off raccoons, while a little kid, Tim, used his character Jellykin to fight off a gamer who made him lose his match due to him being a hacker. A psychologist uses his comic character Mr. Z to seek advice based on his profession. Meanwhile, the mysterious woman takes Dirk to a pub where he meets up with Scott, the creator of the comics. Dirk is surprised by Scott's strength, but he is lucky enough that Scott doesn't harm him as he only wants to offer him more comics, which delights Dirk as he lets out an evil laughter. Nick and Mike decide to do some investigation on the numerous thefts committed in the city. Although Mike agrees it looked off, he still doesn't want to create problems for himself. Just as they are looking for clues, they find Mr. Harry and Hummingbird. Salvaging the outcome of their theft, they summon Crying Man to attack the duel, but instead, the masked girl and Greatfinger are quick to rise to the occasion. They attack Hummingbird, who tries to escape the scene with Harry. Greatfinger tries to use his almighty finger on the Hummingbird, but he manages to escape the massive attack. This singular attack causes so much damage that the masked girl has to withdraw Greatfinger and introduce Lucky the giant dog. Lucky goes after the duo as they try to escape. Meanwhile, Mike and Crying Man tries to help the masked girl, but she refuses their help as she is so focused on capturing Hummingbird and his comic. During the intense chase, they begin to fight on a train, causing the train to lose its brake instability. Mike manages to save a few people before they are being crushed by the train. He is surprised that the masked girl doesn't care about the people, but rather her main focus is on the comic book. To save the train from jumping into the ocean, Mike has to summon Mummy's girl. She uses her power to stop the train from falling into the sea, saving a whole lot of people in the process. After becoming their savior, Mike becomes so exhausted and then falls into the river. The next day when Mike wakes up, he sees himself at home and realizes that he was rescued, but unfortunately, he is no longer with his Crying Man comic book and figures out that he has lost Crying Man forever. His sadness soon turns to joy when he realizes that he will pair up with Lucy, his school crush, for their history project. During the class, he focuses on her and as usual imagines beautiful moments with her. She snaps him off his daydream, saying they need to finish up the research work. When Mike notices that Lucy is hungry, he takes her to his favorite burger spot. When Lucy gets a taste of the burger, she smiles and Mike is filled with so much joy that he finally makes his crush smile. He decides to bring her to the comic shop, where he shows her mother's favorite band album. Lucy seems to like it and lets out another smile, which makes Mike beam with joy. Just as they are about to leave, a strange guy enters the comic shop, bumping into Mike. The shop clerk lets him know that he comes into the store every day looking for a magical comic that could bring superheroes to life. She mocks him, calling him a psycho, but then the strange man finds a comic book with the name Self. He speaks into it, and it surprisingly comes to life. The strange man uses Self for his personal gain as he commands the fairy to destroy the people because they always refer to him as a psycho. We get to find out that Self is indeed powerful when she activates her supreme tornado, causing a really strong hurricane and driving every single person and property towards the tornado. Lucy tries to save Mike from going into the hurricane, but it's too strong for her, so Mike summons Moni's girl to come to their rescue. She manages to save them, but Mike decides to go inside the tornado and get Self's comic book because that is basically the only way he could stop this massive hurricane. Luckily, he is able to grab hold of it as he summons the fairy back into the comic. This results in calm and peaceful weather, where Lucy and Mike reunite. She promises not to tell anyone his secret as their bond grows stronger. After so many weird rumors of superheroes living in town, Mike's mother decides to do a personal investigative research. She goes over to the train crash and finds giant claws on the body of the train. This confirms her suspicions and she goes over to talk to her boss about it. But he isn't interested in any of her investigations. She tries her possible best to convince him that this could be their best story yet. Meanwhile, when Mike returns home, he is surprised to see X, the masked girl. She had come to take all his comics, but Mike isn't willing to let go of them. She summons his favorite superhero, Crying Man. Although Crying Man doesn't want to attack Mike, he has no other choice but to follow the orders of his new Master X. He attacks him with his tears as Mike jumps out of his window in an attempt to escape. He summons up Mummy's Girl to save him as they proceed to battle on the roof. The Crying Man is no match for Mummy's Girl because she knows all his tricks. So X summons a second hero, Gravity, to join in the fight. Mike is shocked because this is impossible and has never happened before. But X just proved them wrong, saying he is no match for her. He runs away in fear after Crying Man advises him to flee because X is too powerful. After Mummy's Girl is being defeated, Mike decides to summon up Black Knight, but he doesn't want to battle against his old friend Crying Man. As a result, they are both defeated. Mike returns Black Knight to the comic as he decides to fight with Sylph, being a perfect match for X and her characters. Mike summons her and activates her powerful tornado, but Great Finger manages to take her out with his almighty finger. He summons Lucky the giant dog to finally collect all his comics, but things turn around when we get to find out that Mike had stolen Crying Man comic book from X during the tornado fight. He summons Crying Man as he uses his Tsunami of Tears to defeat every one of them. After the victory, Mike is surprised to see that X is actually Lucy behind the mask. When they finally meet up at school, Lucy decides to tell him about everything. She tells Mike that Scott the Creator is her uncle. When she was little, she loved comics and was her uncle's first comic book patronizer. But when her father noticed that she spent so much time reading comics with her uncle, he stopped her from reading comics again, as he wanted her to focus on her studies instead, so she doesn't end up like her uncle Scott, who he considers a failure. She didn't hear from her uncle for a long then until 2 months ago, when he sent a letter asking her to take care of his comics as he doesn't want them falling into the wrong hands. When she went to his apartment, she discovered that all his comics were gone, and she was only left with the Great Finger comic. She decides to embark on a mission to find and recover all the comic books because she believes it's the only way she can get to see her uncle again. Nick, who was eavesdropping on their conversation, is shocked to find out that Lucy is the masked woman. There he shows them a video circulating that San Francisco is under attack. Dirk has teamed up with a group of rebels. He has introduced his new comic book to them, and together they have vowed to cause terror to the state. The rebels are able to terrorize the state as they use their characters to fight every single police that came to restore order. They had taken over as every single person was running to safety, with nobody to rescue them. Tara, Mike's mother, is present as she begins recording every single evil Dirk and his goons are causing. Mike and the others arrive at the scene. The city is already in ruins as they try to help out in one way or the other. Dirk decides to tell the spotlight as he gives out a speech saying the city needs a revolution, and he belongs to a crew known as the Comic Councils. They are made up of weirdos and nerds who have been put behind their shadows. During his speech, Scott applauds Dirk as he watches from his TV. He is happy that his plan is going really well. When Dirk notices that Mike and his friends have arrived at the scene, he goes all out on them as he is determined to make sure that nobody puts a restraint on their revolution. During their intense battle, Crying Man tries to use his Tsunami Tears to defeat Jizang, a particular comic character, but the more he uses water on him, the more he grows stronger. Crying Man is electrocuted when he tries to use water on Sparkles. Dirk orders his comic council to finish up the Mike and Lucy, but Lucy manages to call in Gravity, who united with Sylph to create a powerful tornado mixed with gravity that sends all the comic council's character to the ground with a powerful blast. Dirk is disappointed and summons his own character, Iron Man. He is able to attract all kinds of iron to his body. Dirk continues by summoning Sparkles to light up the iron with his lightning and destroy the whole city. When Mike pictures how the city will be destroyed, including Lucy, he becomes really emotional and then summons up all his characters at once. Dirk is surprised that Mike is able to summon 5 characters at a time. The whole superheroes are able to stop the explosion from happening at San Francisco as they take it further away towards the sky. After his ultimate victory, Mike collapses as all the townspeople gather together to praise their hero. We get to find out that Scott had only used Dirk to push his agenda that heroes should be appreciated more in the city as he looks to release his new comic, Super Scott. The end. If you love this video, please leave a like and subscribe.